Whoever fights monsters should see it to that in the process he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you. Geralt wandered around the deserted patch of forest for a long time, not really looking for anything, just letting Roach take him where she takes him. His mind was likewise wandering. His conversations with Nivellen, the couple lying dead in the meadow, the wondrous indigo roses in the courtyard, and the elusive arena. All of it was connected, yet he felt something was off. Nivellen did not strike him as someone who would go out of his way to track down and hunt an old man and a young girl just for the sin of walking on his grass or plucking a rose. Not all monsters are truly monstrous. The sun was sinking rapidly towards the horizon. Night will soon be upon them. Cover was abundant in the old forest, but Geralt chose a clearing atop a barren hill to spend the night. Kneeling beside the campfire with his sword resting on his lap, Geralt rested, with the mare sleeping quietly to his right. In the black of night, his eyes caught a glimmer of light. A small campfire down in the valley. For long, the quiet forest air was filled with distant echoes of singing, shouting, and hysterical laughter, when suddenly, a blood-chilling scream pierced the night and ended the merry festival. The woman's screams of agony continued for a while before ending abruptly. Geralt didn't sleep that night. Come morning, Geralt made his way down the valley. He found nothing but cold remains of bonfire and trampled grass. He didn't stick around for long, spurring the mare north towards the highway. Roach seemed on edge this morning, walking faster than usual and throwing her head around, so their progress was hardly hindered by the thick, overgrown bushes that covered the forest ground. They emerged on the highway at the point where it turned away from a small river and continued west towards the Meria. Geralt dismounted and walked over towards the quiet stream, with Roach following closely behind. Kneeling on the muddy shore, he went to refill his leather water flask when Roach neighed loudly and stomped her feet. Turning to face the unruly mare, Geralt said, "You're becoming quite a hysteric, Roach." Yet he knew animal instincts greatly surpassed that of a human. Out of the corner of his eyes, he could see something floating down the stream. Stuck together by the river's current, bundled like stacks of hay, dark patches consisting of dozens of dead fishes were dotting the stream. His eyes fixated on the glare of shiny scales, absent-mindedly scratching his beard. "Animals like me," he muttered to himself quietly. Suddenly, he stood back up and mounted the mare. "Sorry, Roach, it turns out you got more brains than me." He yet again spurred the mare, this time leaning out of the saddle and following their own footprints. The mare flattened her ears against her skull and snorted, throwing up earth with her hooves. She didn't want to go. Geralt didn't calm her with the sign. He jumped out of the saddle and threw the reins over the horse's head. He no longer had his old sword and its lizard skin sheet on his back. Its place was filled with a shining, beautiful weapon with a circumform and slender, well-weighted hilt ending in a spherical pommel made of white metal. This time the gate didn't open for him. It was already open, just as he had left it. He heard singing. He didn't understand the words. He couldn't even identify the language, yet he didn't need to. The Witcher felt and understood the very nature, the essence of this quiet, piercing song which flowed through the veins in a wave of nauseous, overpowering menace. The singing broke off abruptly, and then he saw her. She was clinging to the back of the dolphin in the dried-up fountain, embracing the moss-overgrown stone with her tiny hands, so pale they seemed transparent. Beneath her storm of tangled black hair shone huge, wide-open eyes the color of anthracite. Geralt slowly drew closer, his step soft and springy, tracing the semicircle from the wall on the blue rosebush. The creature glued to the dolphin's back followed him with her eyes, turning her petite face with an expression of longing and full of charm. He could still hear her song, even though her thin, pale lips were held tight and not the slightest sound emerged from them. The Witcher halted at a distance of 10 paces, His sword, slowly drawn from his black enameled sheath, glistened and glowed above his head. "It's silver," he said. "The blade is silver." The pale little face did not flinch. The anthracite eyes did not change expression. "You're so like a rusalka," the Witcher continued calmly, "that you could deceive anyone. All the more, you're a rare bird, black-haired one. But horses are never mistaken. They recognize creatures like you instinctively and perfectly. What are you? I think you're a mula or an alpor. An ordinary vampire couldn't come out in the sun." The corner of the pale lips quivered and turned up a little. "Nivellen attracted you with that shape of his, didn't he? You evoked his dreams. I can guess what sort of dreams they were, and I pity him." The creature didn't move. "You like birds," continued the Witcher, "but that doesn't stop you from biting the necks of people of both sexes, does it? You and Nivellen, indeed, what a beautiful couple you'd make. A monster and a vampire, ruler of a forest castle. You dominate the whole area in a flash, you, eternally thirsty for blood, and he, your guardian, a murderer at your service, a blind tool. But first, he had to become a true monster, not a human being in a monster's mask." The huge black eyes narrowed. "Where is he, black-haired one? You were singing, so you've drunk some blood. You've taken the ultimate measure, which means you haven't managed to enslave his mind. Am I right?" The black trested head nodded slightly, and the corners of the mouth turned up even more. The tiny little face took on an eerie expression. "No doubt you consider yourself the lady of this manor now." A nod, this time clearer. "Are you a mula?" Slow shake of the head. The hiss which reverberated through his bones could have only come from the pale, ghastly, smiling lips, although the Witcher didn't see them move. "Alpor?" "Nile." The Witcher backed away and clasped the hilt of his sword tighter. "That means you're..." The corner of the lips started to turn up higher and higher. The lips flew open. "A bruxa!" the Witcher shouted, throwing himself towards the fountain. From behind the pale lips glistened white, spiky fangs. The vampire jumped up, arched her back like a leopard, and screamed. The wave of sound hit the Witcher like a battering ram, depriving him of breath, crushing his ribs, piercing his ears and brains with the thorns of pain. Lying backwards, he just managed to cross his wrist in the sign of Helitrap. The spell cushioned some of the impact, but even so, the world grew dark, and the reminder of his breath burst from his lungs in a groan. On the dolphin's back, in the stone circle of the dried-up fountain where a Dianity girl in a white dress had just sat a moment ago, an enormous black bat flattened its glossy body, opening its long, narrow jaws wide and revealing a row of needle-like teeth. The membranous wings spread wide and flapped silently, and the creature charged at the Witcher like an arrow fired from a crossbow. Geralt, with the metallic taste of blood in his mouth, shouted a spell and drew his hand, fingers spread in the sign of Quen out in front of him. The bat, hissing, turned abruptly and then chuckled and veered up into the air before diving down vertically, straight at the nape of the Witcher's neck. Geralt jumped aside, slashed, and missed. The bat smoothly, gracefully drew in a wing, circled around him, and attacked anew, opening its eyeless, toothed snout wide. Geralt waited, sword held in both hands, always pointed in the creature's direction. At the last moment, he jumped, not to the side, but forward, dealing a swinging cut which made the air howl. He missed. It was so unexpected that he lost his rhythm and dodged a fraction of a second too late. He felt the beast's talon tear his cheek, and the damp, velvety wing slapped against his neck. Curled up on the spot, transferred the weight of his body to his right leg and slashed backwards, sharply, missing the amazingly agile creature. The bat beat its wings, soared up, and glided towards the fountain. The bruxa howled piercingly, modulating her voice in a macabre tune, glared at the Witcher with the eyes full of hatred, and screamed again. "Shout, vampire!" he growled, wiping the blood from his cheek. "Scream your guts out, lose your strength, and then I'll slash your pretty little head off."
You will be the first to grow weak, sorcerer. I will kill you."
The Bruxa's lip didn't move, but the Witcher heard the words clearly. They resounded in his mind, echoing and reverberating as if underwater. "We shall see," he muttered through his teeth as he walked, bent over, in the direction of the fountain.
I will kill you. I'll kill you. I'll kill you.
"We shall see."
Marina!
Nivellen, his head hanging low and both hands clinging to the doorframe, stumbled from the mansion. He staggered towards the fountain, waving his paws unsteadily. Blood stained the cuff of his tunic.
Marina!
He roared again. The Bruxa jerked her head in his direction. Geralt, raising his sword to strike, jumped towards her, but the vampire's reaction was much faster. A sharp scream and another shockwave knocked the Witcher from his feet. He tumbled onto his back and scraped against the gravel path. The Bruxa arched and tensed to jump, her fangs flashing like daggers. Nivellen, spreading his paws like a bear, tried to grab her, but she screamed straight into his face, throwing him back against the wooden scaffolding under the wall, which broke with a sharp crash and buried him beneath a stack of timber. Geralt was already on his feet, running, tracing a semicircle around the courtyard, trying to draw the Bruxa's attention away from Nivellen. The vampire, fluttering her white dress, scurried straight at him, light as a butterfly, barely touching the ground. She was no longer screaming, no longer trying to morph. The Witcher knew she was tired and that she was still lethal. Behind Geralt's back, Nivellen was clattering under the scaffolding, roaring. Geralt leapt to the left, executing a short moulinet with a sword to confuse the Bruxa gliding towards him. He'd underestimated her. She screamed. He didn't make the sign in time, flew backwards until he thumped against the wall. The pain in his spine shot all the way to the tips of his fingers, paralyzing his shoulders, cut him down at the legs. He fell to his knees. The Bruxa, wailing melodiously, jumped towards him.
Marina!
Roared Nivellen. She turned, and Nivellen forced the sharp broken end of a 3-meter-long pole between her breasts. She didn't shout. She only sighed. The Witcher shook, hearing this sigh. They stood there. Nivellen, on widespread legs, was wielding the pole in his both hands, one end firmly secured under his arm. The Bruxa, like a white butterfly on a pin, hung on the other end of the stake, clutching it with both hands. The vampire exhaled excruciatingly and suddenly pressed herself hard against the stake. Geralt watched a red stain bloom on her back. Nivellen screamed, took one step back, then another, retreating from her, but he didn't let go of the pole and dragged the Bruxa behind him. One more step and he leaned back against the mansion. Slowly, as if a caress, the Bruxa moved her tiny hands along the stake, stretched her arms out to their full length, grasped the pole hard and pulled on it again. Over a meter of bloodied wood already protruded from her back. Her eyes were wide open, her head flung back. Her sighs became more frequent and rhythmic, turning into a ruckling wheeze. Geralt stood, but fascinated by the scene, still couldn't make himself act. Another terrible, vibrating sigh, choking in blood. The Bruxa moved further along the pole and stretched out her arms. Nivellen roared desperately and, without letting go of the stake, tried to push the vampire as far from himself as possible, but in vain. She pulled herself closer and grabbed him by the head. He wailed horrifically and tossed his hairy head. The Bruxa moved along the pole again and tilted her hair towards Nivellen's throat. The fangs flashed a blinding white. Geralt jumped. Every move he made, every step, was part of his nature, hard-learned, automatic, and lethally sure. 3 quick steps, and the third, like 100 such steps before, finished on the left leg with a strong, firm stamp. A twist of his torso and a sharp, forceful cut. He saw her eyes. Nothing could change now. He heard a voice. Nothing. He yelled to drown out the words which she was repeating. Nothing could change. He cut. He struck decisively, like 100 times before, with the center of the blade, and immediately, following the rhythm of his movement, took a 4th step and a half turn. The blade, freed by the half turn, floated after him, shining, drawing a fan of red droplets in its wake. The streaming raven black hair floated in the air. Head fell on the gravel. There are fewer and fewer monsters, and what am I? Nivellen curled up in a bundle, sheltering his head in his arms and shaking with twitchers and shivers. He was lying in the nettles by the manor's wall. "Get up," said the Witcher. The young, handsome, well-built man with a pale complexion lying by the wall raised his head and looked around. His eyes were vague. He rubbed them with his knuckles. He looked at his hands, felt his face. He moaned quietly and, putting his finger in his mouth, ran it along his gums for a long time. He grasped his face again and moaned as he touched the 4 bloody swollen streaks on his cheek. He burst out sobbing, then laughed. "Geralt, how come? How did this... Geralt?" "Get up, Nivellen. Get up and come along. I've got some medication in my saddlebags. We both need it." "I've no longer got... I haven't, have I? Geralt, why?" The Witcher helped him get up, trying not to look at the tiny hand, so pale as to be transparent, clenched around the pole stuck between the small breasts which were now plastered with a red fabric. Nivellen kept touching his face with his free hand. "Incredible, Geralt, after so many years. How is it possible?" "There's a grain of truth in every fairy tale," said the Witcher quietly. "Love and blood, they both possess a mighty power. Wizards and learned men have been racking their brains over this for years, but they haven't arrived at anything except that... That what, Geralt? It has to be true love." And with that, Geralt's encounter with Nivellen and Verena is officially over. This episode ends the grain of truth, the 4th episode of A Witcher Stories. Now after this, my plan is to do a lore video, Yennefer lore to be exact, but before that I also want to do a small short video that's probably not going to take too much time, so expect the continuation of my video series in about, I would say 2, maybe 3 weeks. But anyhow, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any comments, put them in the comment section below because that's what comment sections are for, and I will see you some other time. Bye bye.